Good morning, Warsaw. Today is Wednesday, 30th of August. It will be mostly cloudy with some rainfall, with highs of 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 5:59 a.m. and sunset at 7:45 p.m. We are on the 30th day of the Warsaw Uprising, and important relics are hidden, but what else is happening, Alina?
Yeah, cheers for that, Philippe. I'm going to be really super quick on this one before we move to Clare, but I just want to mention that the Mokotów district, which is in the south, is under heavy German artillery fire, and it was directed into the northern part of it. By the afternoon, the Germans ended up bombing a hospital, many wounded are killed, and throughout the day there's very heavy artillery fire and air raids coming into Śródmieście, so the Midtown district, and more specifically into Powiśle, which is right by the river, up by the Midtown. But Claire, there's some interesting, well, actually, funny enough, Philippe has pretty much given the game away with this, but let's talk about some of these relics.
I mean, the 30th of August is a really horrific day. And I think we are going to have to brace ourselves and look at some of the atrocities today. When we're trying not to do it every day, we don't want to be gratuitous about it, but the 30th of August really stands out. But before we go into that, there is one quite nice story which I wanted to raise, which is about a Jesuit priest who was known as Father Pavel. That was his code name. He was actually Józef Wawarski. And I had spoken earlier about the cultural work that was being done across the city to try and rescue some of the artifacts, documents, the maps that it was feared the Germans would destroy in their sort of cultural destruction of Polish history. And this priest is very involved. I mean, he's one of those characters that you could have a short film about. He risks his life to hide the relics of a saint, a very famous saint called Andrzej Bobola. There are relics of this saint in over 120 parishes around Poland and many Jesuit centres, both in Poland and around the rest of the world. So this is important material. And Wawarski hides the relics of the saint in the church basement at St. Jacek Church to stop them being looted as the Germans begin to take that part of the city. And he's contributing. This is something, when we think, what are we fighting for? They're fighting for their city. They're fighting for the freedom of the Poland. This man is fighting for the relics of a saint. This is his identity. This is his faith. This is what he knows is going to be destroyed around him. So people are motivated by all sorts of different things. And this is important for the Polish Catholic population, of course. But Wawarski is important as well. He was a very courageous man, very, very brave man. And later on in September, he would be captured. And while he was held under a machine gun pointing right at him, he managed to negotiate to save the lives of 120 people when he got them recognized as prisoners of war in the Czerniaków district of Warsaw, when the Germans were capturing them and they were going to send them off as bandits, basically, to concentration and labour camps. So it's important to remember these individual stories. But I have to say that's a rare story it's not a rare story of courage, but it's a rare story when lives are saved, because the 30th of August is really marked out as a black day in the history, isn't it? You've got an account of a company who are killed, haven't you, Alina? And then I'd like to contribute a bit more on another area.
Yes, if you go up to the New Town section of the Old Town, there is a beautiful tenement building on Zakroczymska Street. And by the way, if I say things and people want to be sure of what I'm saying and where it is, please just feel free to send me a DM on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. A couple of people have already done that, which is amazing, and I love being able to help people when they're looking for specific things, so keep on coming with these messages. But yeah, Zakroczymska Street, number 7, there's a beautiful tenement house that's been rebuilt, and outside the front of it is like half a boulder sort of thing, and that's where there is a commemoration of the 3rd Company from Battalion Zośka. And it's there that there was a bombing, a very heavy bombing on this day, where most of the company were killed, including their commander, Władysław Miłosław Cieplak. He died together with his soldiers. There was a total of 28 soldiers, including 4 messengers and nurses at the headquarters. This was the headquarters of their building. And it's commemorated, and every year on this day there are flowers laid, and obviously this year being the 80th, there's probably a larger commemoration for it. But yes, so a large group of people perished under the rubble during an air raid.
So that's obviously appalling, and there were many more deaths on the 30th of August as well. One that I want to mention is we talked a bit about the number of weddings that take place during the uprising. In fact, I think there were 256 weddings altogether, which is a real indication of, young people. It's life affirming, isn't it? What's better than a wedding? People are saying, we have got a future. We're going to survive. We're making plans. It's seizing life. So that's about 4 weddings every day of the uprising. But unfortunately, of course, there were many deaths. Many of these young people didn't have a future together. Either one or both of them were killed. And on the 30th of August, there is a German bombing raid on one of Warsaw's major thoroughfares, and one of the bombs hits one of the insurgents' restaurants. So this is a small place. It was known as Swoja, which means her own. So it's probably a small run place with whatever that she could cobble together. But inside there was a wedding party. 2 of the insurgents had got married, and there were 10 of the fighters there helping them to celebrate. They were due to attack the Saxon Gardens the following day. So I think they were seizing that moment and having one party, one celebration, and they were all killed. The young couple, there was an 18-year-old nurse, and her code name was Teresa, and a 26-year-old fighter who was known as Broza. And this, obviously horrendous, of course, but it wasn't unusual. There were similar bombings targeting, I don't think they were targeting the wedding party, but this is the collateral damage that's taking part every day. In fact, that same day, the Germans killed another 300 wounded patients in the cellars of St. John the God Hospital, which is one of these insurgency hospitals. And there was another hospital bombed, wasn't it? Alina.
Yes, I'm going to talk about the Ujazdowski Hospital. So this was on, oddly enough, on Ujazdowski Street originally. But in the first days of the uprising, the hospital more or less functioned normally up until the 5th of August. That's when the Germans came in onto the hospital grounds. They set fire to the neighbouring buildings and ordered all the hospital staff to evacuate. So on the following day, they all marched out under Red Cross flags, which basically would identify who they are. There was about 340 people from the neighbouring hospital and 1,491 people from Ujazdowski Hospital. So this included wounded, sick, doctors, pharmacists, chaplains, nurses, hospital employees, their families, and obviously the sick. The Germans then added to this column with about 350 women who'd been held hostage at the same building, which is just down the road, and the seriously wounded were carried on stretchers. Now, they weren't given a specific destination. They ended up just walking, and they walked south, and only when they reached a certain point did the local population decide to start helping and assisting the hospital staff in carrying these people on stretchers. And they managed to find shelter at the Sisters of Divine Providence Institute on Helmska Street. Nowadays, if you go there, it's actually a filming studio. The building doesn't exist anymore. And then with the help of the sisters, the local population, the hospital was equipped with beds, mattresses, underwear, clothing, medicines, dressings, and it became the only medical aid centre, the only medical point in that area. And then eventually German prisoners of war were also treated there. So coming back to this specific day and what happened here, again, this is another thing I'm having to reiterate from previous episodes, is that this hospital was clearly marked with a Red Cross symbol. So the Germans bombed it. They carried out a massive, massive air raid, and inside this hospital, on this day, on the 30th of August, it was overcrowded. There was over 800 wounded and many, many civilians. 300 people died under the rubble and in the fire of this building in the aftermath. It was absolutely devastating. Unfortunately, this is not the end for the hospital, because the Germans repeat air raids on this hospital on the 11th, 14th and 15th of September, which claims another 200 victims. And most of the staff managed to get out. Some of the wounded managed to get out too, and the chaplain also. One more thing I want to add is Teofil Kucharski. He actually witnesses this and he sees the air raids with his own eyes. I'll let him tell his part of the story.
On the morning of the 30th of August, the Germans shelled the hospital, but no harm was done to the people. They demolished a tower that had the Polish Red Cross flag on it. On the same day, there were 2 air raids from dive bombers at about 5:30, 6:30 p.m. The first raid damaged only the washing room. During the second air raid, the Germans used high explosive and incendiary bombs. And when they tore down the hospital and the staff housing, they opened fire with onboard weapons at the people who remained alive. The wing of the building, which was occupied by the sisters and the children, was left intact. The hospital wing and the staff housing were almost completely demolished. About 300 wounded people and staff members were killed under the rubble.
That's just absolutely devastating. But we do have to move on, and that brings Roger into our fold to talk about foreign media. What are the press outside of Poland saying?
Yeah, there's an article on the 30th of August in the Johannesburg Star, which was a report outlining the activities of those members of the South African Air Force who've been assisting with the supply drops to Warsaw. Of course, as we've said a few times, this was very much a multinational effort. So you have British pilots, also South Africans, obviously, and of course Poles of the Special Duty Squadron. And it's significant, I think, that the South African contribution is being recognised there. And this article actually gives a rather sort of vivid description of what it was like to fly in over Warsaw. Talks about the bombers arriving over Warsaw and seeing an inferno of fire over the city. The city was in flames. Red glow of the city was visible from 50 miles away. And a huge firestorm of anti-aircraft fire as well coming up to greet them. And the crews said that there was never a more difficult task than trying to deliver those supplies to the insurgents in Warsaw. So it's kind of significant in the sense of, I suppose, bringing word of what was going on in Warsaw to an outside audience, and particularly one as far away as Johannesburg. Because bear in mind, of course, there's constant news of, this is the sort of tail end of the war, but there's constant news of engagements and battles and diplomatic shifts and alliances being formed and all sorts of things going on. So to actually, get Warsaw onto the pages of a South African newspaper is a significant thing.
I agree with you, Roger. That's such an interesting point you've made there, that in South Africa, such a long distance away from Poland and Warsaw, it is a really significant thing that the Warsaw Uprising has made it on the front pages. But otherwise, we haven't touched really on what the Germans have been up to today, and you're our man for the job, Roger. You might as well continue with this.
Yeah, so we've used some of the entries from Erich von den Bach-Zelewski's diary. He, of course, was the SS commander in Warsaw. And his entry for the 30th of August is quite interesting because to some extent he's sort of painting the devil on the wall, because he talks about expecting a major Bolshevik offensive. Those were his words. And you have, of course, the Soviets, the Red Army, are in control of the eastern bank of the Vistula, so Praga and so on the eastern side of the Vistula. And as we've described, they've been essentially sitting there doing very little. For most of August, as we've described, Stalin has been very condemnatory in his view towards the Warsaw Rising, describing it as, ill-gotten adventure by bandits and that sort of thing. So the Red Army is sitting there. I suppose from a German perspective, they see it as inevitable that there will be some advance at some point. Now, we know that doesn't come for another couple of weeks. But it's interesting that certainly there must have been some intelligence source that informed von den Bach that something was imminent, because he says they're expecting a major Bolshevik offensive at any time. Now, we know that didn't happen for a couple of weeks, but it's interesting that the Germans were themselves on tenterhooks waiting for that to happen, even on the 30th of August.
And that is the end of day 30. We only have one day left in September to cover, and we're more or less about halfway through the Warsaw Uprising. Remember, if you do like us, leave us that 5-star review. Encourage your American friends. Actually, we need some more Australians too. And it's also incredible. We have 6 Russian listeners, which is shocking in itself. And we've got a load more new German listeners. So I'm really impressed with the amount of people from so many different countries that are listening to us. We've got no Slovakians though, but we do have some Czechs. And we will see you tomorrow for day 31. Hold on to your trousers. It's going to be a very interesting episode.